Hello and welcome to Catholic Parents Online, a podcast where we share tips and resources on Catholic parenting. This is brought to you by the Theology of the Body parenting team of the Apostolate for Catholic Truth. Presented with the lens of the theology of the body, we will see how we can be a sincere gift of ourselves to our kids, in ways that will help them find true happiness and flourish in accordance with God's wonderful plan for each and every one of them. My name is John Hui and I'm your host for this podcast. Today we continue with the fourth part of our series interviewing Mr. Bryan Shen, a much sought after speaker and counsellor. And today he will be speaking on the role of religion and society in our development as human persons. Bryan is a professional counsellor and supervisor registered with the Singapore Association for Counselling. He has much experience in working with clients both young and the not so young, including of course parents. He is also a member of the International Federation for Therapeutic Counselling and Choice. Hello Bryan and welcome to the show.
Hello John, thanks for having me here.
Okay, so how are you today?
Good, thank you.
Okay, that's great. So are we ready to start with this podcast on the role of religion and society in our development as human persons? Yes. Then let's go ahead.
Okay, so today I would like to share a little bit about some of the cases I have in which the clients are very stressed out and they are not able to be themselves. Now, many of these clients are actually very high performing students, very high performing adults. But their high performance are actually coming from this fear of not being able to deliver, this fear of not being able to give the good results that is expected of them. When I asked them, have you always been like that? And they would say, well, actually all throughout my life I've been doing well in school. And when I asked them, has there ever been times that you are stressed out? Yes, a few times when I felt that I would not be able to meet the deadline, or I felt that I would not be able to complete. That's when my stress it really comes up. But other times I'm fine. I said, other times you're fine, it doesn't mean that you're relaxed, you're actually working very hard. I said, yeah, I'm working very hard, but I can cope with it. I can deal with it. So sometimes when I ask about their parents, we can see that they also have the same trait. But there are some parents who never have the stress because they are always high performing. And the children will say, my dad is always on the ball, he's always, really on the dot, everything. Or my mother, she's really, really there, really on top of everything. And we were just not allowed to drop the ball. But again, there are some parents which the children will say, my mother is always very, very hyper afraid, and her emotions of being afraid of things going wrong is passed on to us, and so we all carry the same thing. So my point is, how is this passed on to society? And then a little part of my talk I will talk about how the church, not just the church but all religions, can play a role in reducing this problem. So let me give you an example of this client that I have recently. He is considered one of the good employers in his company. And he's given a job and he's asked to complete it in 5 days. And they give it to him because they all felt that he was the one that will be able to give them the work done and at a high quality. Now, this client who came to see me, and he said, I am not able to function until I get it done. So I can't sleep, I can't eat well, and I have got to get it done. So I asked him, this project, was it over? Yeah, it happened last week. And I said, did you finish it on time? Yes, I finished it in 3 days. I said, why in 3 days? Because until I finish it, I'm unable to do anything else. I will not be able to sleep. I will not be able to even function. So I had to go to complete it, and since I completed, I just submitted it. I said, were you the only one doing this work? He says, no, I was just part of the other team. And what about the others? Well, they all had smaller roles, and they all didn't finish, some of them finished it just in the nick of time on 5 days. I said, so were you the only one that finished it in 3 days? I said, yes, I was the only one that finished in 3 days. Were other people given similar job? No, we had other departments who also had the same task, but it was just in a different area, and nobody could finish it on time. So I said, so you were the only one who finished it ahead of time? And I said, yes, but it's only because, like I told you, I'm not able to function if I don't finish it. I said, what if you don't finish it? I said, I just have this nagging feeling in the back of my head, and I just can't function. And I said to him, do you know that you are spoiling the market? Did you know that, I asked him, by the way, are they marking you as someone who would be promoted? He says, yeah, they've already said, they would like me to be promoted, and my immediate head and says, they said, yeah, we really like you, and the way they're talking to me is like, I will be promoted in time. And this is a pretty large company. And I said, over the many years, it is people like you who will be promoted. And when you get promoted, the only ones who will get promoted under you will be those who can perform the way you do. And therefore, over the years, people cannot function in a relaxed state. They can only function at a very, very high performing state. And this is the reason why so many large corporations over the years, it's just getting more and more difficult to get the job done, because the expectations just keep going higher and higher, because people like you will be promoted. And that's the danger. So I said to him, tell me about your history. He says, my whole history is about being afraid of not being able to get things done. And I said, who's the one that's pushing all the time? Oh, it's my father. I would remember a time he would put me into the, this dark room, and I would cry, and he would never let me out. It was a terrible emotional trauma for me, because I just didn't get my work done. It's also affecting my eating. So every time when we go out, and the moment I feel that I cannot finish the food, that's when my stomach gets the cramps, and my father would punish me if I don't finish the food. There was once he was the one looking. I tried to throw my food away without him looking. He caught me, and he gave me a beating so badly. And now, every time when I'm stressed, I can't eat. And therefore, because I cannot eat, I must finish my work. If I don't finish my work, I can't eat. So these are all some of the symptoms of the stress. Okay, so these are all some of the hidden background stories of people who perform. And because they perform so well, better than anyone else, they are promoted. This is something society must be aware of. This is something which all religions must beware of and look out very, very clearly, that we have certain hidden dangers in our society. What is the developmental experience that makes a child so compulsively high performing? What is the developmental experience that makes a child so quiet? What is the development experience that makes a child look odd or is unable to socialize? And here's the thing, many of these children are bullied in school. So if our religion as well as our educational system will deepen this diversity awareness, in other words, it has to begin by an openness to know what makes a person the way he is or she is. And we should always be open to what is the developmental experience that makes a person the way they are, the way they behave, the way they are compulsively so afraid of failure. That is so crucial. Now, let me use an analogy of physical poverty. I think all religions, we teach that we do not look down on someone who is physically poor, who is physically unable to afford good clothing, who is physically unable to afford food, physically unable to afford housing. Do we look down on them? No, we don't. We should also go a little step further. We should never look down on someone who is developmentally poor, through no fault of theirs. Their developmental experience, their psychological and familial developmental health is not good because through no fault of theirs, their family's home situation is just not high enough. And I think this neglect has been going on for a long time, and for some families it goes on for generations upon generations that nobody pays attention. And the other thing we should do is to do away with stigma. The stigma of, why is this person weird? Why is this person keeping to himself? Why is this person so high performing or whatever that may be? We should always be open to understand the developmental experience that makes a person who she is or who he is. Now, at that level, I think this is where every religion can play a role. And this is where, even in our Christian faith, where we have the scriptures through the Psalms that says, even if a mother would neglect you, I, God, will never, never neglect you. And we should reflect that in our community. And we need to emphasize a little bit more in the bigger family of the church. I'm talking about the family of the community. That means a father figure, a mother figure. In our Catholic nomenclature, we call the priest father, we call the sister, a nun a sister, or a religious a brother. That shouldn't be a title. It really should mean a father figure, a mother figure, a sister, a brother, because not everybody are lucky to have a healthy family unit. So important that we need to have this understanding and develop this family atmosphere in our church community. And then to have this awareness, and from this awareness, we pay more attention to why some people are unable to perform and why some people are overperforming, are compulsively performing. And then we need to pay attention into how we can bring this person down. We can say to this person, you don't need to overperform, you don't need to do this, you don't need to do that. Now, let me close this little lecture that I'm giving about what is the role of the church. And I remembered one of the clergy members who was giving this talk. He says, the church exists for the people outside the church. It doesn't exist for only its members. If it does so, it is just too insular. And I agree with that. What do we do as Christians in society? What do we do as Christians in places where the priest cannot go to? So what if you are a police, or you're a soldier, or you're holding some positions of power and authority in places where the members of the church cannot go in? I think if you can be a Christian that brings these awareness into your work, into the way you deal with other people, into the way in which you understand their developmental backgrounds that makes them what they are. So understanding why some people are unable to perform, as well as why some people have a compulsion to overperform. And then we set the targets and we set the objectives appropriately. And when I say appropriately, it must not, and I say again, it must not be only and solely on profits. As Christians or any other members of other religions, we should look at our purpose here on earth in a holistic manner. So let's talk about sustainability, let's talk about not wasting food, not wasting resources, and not just making money, but having this sustainable way in which people are appreciated for who they really are. So I hope you now have an idea and a sense of how important our role as Christians in society, and what are the trickle-down effects. If we neglect it, it can have tremendous negative effects over the generations. But if we pay attention to what's really, really important, what our awareness of development is, then I think we can do quite a lot to reverse the damaging trends that has come over the last few generations or the last few decades. So thank you for listening to what I've just shared with all of you.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Bryan. I think I fully agree with you that of the need to really recognize the intrinsic dignity and worth of every human person, regardless of social status, regardless of intellectual abilities or physical abilities. Certainly, I think, for example, in our Catholic religion, we are fully cognizant of how being made in the image and likeness of God and the inherent dignity that all of us have from the moment of conception to the point of natural death. And it is so important that we must recognize the beauty of each and every person made in the image and likeness of God. It is interesting that you mentioned that the high-performing individuals in society who perhaps are where they are because of the conditioning that they underwent as children, and possibly some of which may have been very negative, and that so-called rubs off on others around them. I'm just wondering, for colleagues and subordinates who might be affected by these individuals and therefore may feel the pressure, even though they may have been brought up in a totally different environment, but now being in this environment with a high-performing boss who expects the same of them, but they have been brought up with a very different mentality. How can they address the situation without being stressed out, without having to conform, so to speak? What can we say to them, or how can we help them?
Well, there are two general approaches that we can use. So let me give an example of this particular client that I had, that I just spoke about. He is pushed by his emotions to perform. What do I mean by that? So when he's been given a task and he doesn't feel, when he has not completed a task, it is this emotional feel that unless I complete the job, unless I get it finished done, I can't function. So his ability to finish and do the job is emotionally based. And that's what we should not be doing, because we as humans, we have the thinking brain. So I had to guide him and said, look at every day, how many hours do you need to sleep? And he says, actually, I've not been sleeping very well. In fact, every time when I have a task, I can't sleep. And therefore, instead of sleeping, I just do the job and say, okay, in those times, how many hours do you sleep? I said, I only sleep about 4 hours. I said, 4 hours for a young adult like you, and he's only in his 20s, that's not healthy at all. He says, yeah, there was a time I even lost my hair and I couldn't eat, and I have painful ulcers and all of that. It's not healthy. Okay, I said, when you are, let's say, having you take off, and you have some holidays, how many hours do you sleep? I says, I can easily sleep 8-9 hours. I said, for an adult, minimum 8 hours. So put in how much you need to have a healthy sleep, how much hours you need for, you taking a shower, traveling, okay. And then other things, put it all in first. Those are the important things. And then how much time do you have for work? And if you're given a task, ask, how many days are you given? Okay, look, if you're given 5 days, look at the amount of times per day you have, and then you times the amount of days you have. So if, let's say, you have 3 hours times 5, so 15 hours. Look at the task that's given to you. Would 15 hours be enough? And the answer is no. Tell the boss, I don't have enough. Or if it is enough, fit it in. And don't ask for less time. Okay? So for example, if the task requires 8 hours of continuous work, and you have in 5 days, you have 15 hours, spread it out in 5 days. Why? Because that spare time, you can use it for something else. You can use it for time with your family, you can use it for reading up, you can use it for so many other things. You could also use it for maybe another task that may come along. So always spread it out, because you always have to remember there are other people who are given the same task in the same time frame, and you don't want to spoil the market. Now, when you have done that 3 hours per day, cognitively you have done your work, you have done what is allocated to you, and that is all cognitively known. You know that you can put aside your emotions and go to sleep. Add on a little more. You can say your prayers. You can say to the Lord, Lord, I have dedicated these 3 hours to the job that I've done. Now I leave everything in your hands as I go to sleep, as our night prayers is what we are saying, as part of our night prayers. And have your good sleep every night. And that is one way. So it's a cognitive way of planning out, so that you are transferring the emotionally based push into a cognitively based planning out, and you are doing it. You're doing the work, and at this rate you will finish. So that's one way. Now, there is another one, and that is, by the way, this should be the way that you would deal with it, but I know there are some companies that they will give you jobs, impossible time frames, and they expect you to not sleep, but you have to complete it within 1 or 2 days of whatever the reasons that may be. Now, if it is unreasonable, well, tell them that you can't complete on time. And if they say, if you don't complete, we will not promote you, then take the demotion. Why am I saying this? Is because you cannot allow a bad culture to proliferate. Because if you give in, then you entrench that bad culture of expecting people to do it, and if you don't do it, I will not promote you, and then you allow that bad culture to proliferate, you are really spoiling that career. And I know of so many, particularly in large corporations, bad environments, the culture just gets very spoiled because they always hold this stick. You don't give it to us, we will give you a bad report and you will not be promoted. I will say to you, then take the demotion if necessary, get out of there, and you now start your own company, your own way of doing things in a way that is sustainable, not just physically but psychologically, as well as respecting the intrinsic value of each person. So these are the two sides. One is the way in which you plan and you spread things out, and the other one is when things get very unreasonable, don't allow the push for a bad culture to proliferate. So that would be my stand. And one way of allowing you to have that ability to do it is, please do not strive for an expensive, luxurious lifestyle. In all the religions, there's always this preference for a simple lifestyle that is not expensive. And don't forget that the more you're able to live a happy life that is clean and simple and orderly, the more you're able to share that lifestyle with other people who may not be able to afford an expensive lifestyle. So it is a lifestyle that can be shared with happiness. And not only that, that lifestyle gives you that ability to say no. When someone pushes you and says, you don't give it to me, I will not promote you, then you make a move.
Yes, you sound very much like Saint Mother Teresa. But I cannot agree with you more. There's such an important thing to, number one, incorporate prayer into our lives, to listen to the Lord, spend time with Him, and let Him tell us what He wants for us, rather than let others in society tell us what they want of us. All right, and I think that is a very important point that all of us often forget, and it's so important, especially for parents to not just practice, but to really inculcate in their children the need to follow God's plan rather than their own. The other one that struck me was, blessed are the poor. To be poor in spirit, to be totally detached from the material parts of the world, and to really rely everything on God, with the full knowledge that He will take care of us as long as we correspond to His plan, seek out His will, and seek what He wants us to do. He will make sure things will turn out fine for us. And yet, especially, I'm just curious though, at this time, especially brought about by the COVID-19 crisis, and the economy is not good, finding a job or coming up with a new company might also be challenging. It will take a lot of courage for a person to not just take a demotion, but possibly even to come out with a company which will be rather contrary to the culture that he would want to espouse, and start up a new one, or to try to look for another one. That would take a lot of courage during these times.
Yes, definitely so. I am aware that some people have no choice but to make a drastic shift in their careers. And some people are not so drastically pushed to that corner, but if they do make a decision to change, it will take quite a bit to change. I would suggest that you give these, what I've just said about, the culture, the work culture, give it some real good thought with prayer and meditation and discernment, and choose. This is an opportunity with this COVID-19. It's an opportunity to choose a career that really makes sense to you, that really helps you. Now, here's the other thing that I've been doing as part of my work. I've been asked quite a number of times to not just see if there can be some possible problems in the future, but whether the person is on the right career track. But some of them will have certain risks, and that depends on their developmental experiences. So for example, someone who has been verbally abused, physically abused, or even sexually abused, and these have never been addressed, but all these unresolved issues will put them at risk. So this is a work that is increasingly in demand. I'm advocating that the same work be done for those who want to get married, because I don't think any parent want to intentionally be a bad parent.
Certainly.
But when it does happen, who knows? when it does happen, who are the ones who have no voice, who have no power, because the parents are the ones that's holding the power, and it's the children that suffer. And because they have no other way except to introject what you push down on them, that's why the problem goes from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. So what I'm saying is that for those parents in which you understand what I'm saying, let's take the step to reduce the stigma of doing a psychological profiling for yourself, as much as there is no stigma in doing a medical check for yourself. Today, there is such a thing called preventive medicine, in which they do a thorough check, not only of what you are right now, but also your history, your family's history, and they can point out to you where are your risk factors in terms of your medical histories. We can do the same for your psychological and your background histories. We can do the same things, and these can help guide you choose the right career, the right directions to choose for your next job that you want to do. Get to know yourself even more and choose something that really goes in line with who you are and what really gives you the passion to do the work that will serve society and everybody.
Yeah, well, since we are on this topic of discerning a career path or rather a vocation in life, perhaps I'm just wondering whether you could actually give us some tips as to how a person could discern what would be the right vocation for him or her in their life, and especially for those who perhaps might be contemplating a mid-career change, which will be a very drastic move, which some, or in fact I think many are considering, given the changing circumstances in society and the changing conditions that we are facing. But at the same time, they are perhaps facing these challenges when the children are in most need of them, or in most need of the stable financial situation back home. So perhaps would you be able to share with us some tips as to how such individuals might be able to discern their vocation well?
Let me begin by taking a step back a little bit more. In general, those who are in a career not because they choose, but because they are trying to live up to somebody's expectations of them. So for example, someone who chooses to become a doctor, but actually that person does not want to be a doctor. Or someone chooses to go into engineering, but I don't really want to be an engineer or a lawyer. It doesn't really matter. These are the ones who will reach their midlife crisis faster than anyone else. Yes, and burnout and everything. Okay. Initially, when they succeed in becoming a doctor, a lawyer, everybody cheers them. And for the first few years or even 10 years, everything is fine. But once the cheering dies down, and that will bring them to around their 40s, that's when they feel it is just not rewarding anymore. Okay, so that's what I want to say. In general, if you didn't really discern well from the very beginning, you will have this problem in the end. But it's not just being pushed into a direction that you want, but sometimes your perception of what you think life is supposed to be rewarding. Money, status, you think, no one pushes you, but that's the mantra that the society tells you, and you follow that, you can still end up into this sense of meaninglessness. Maybe a little later, maybe in the late 40s or even 50s. And of course, sometimes some people, everything is going fine, and you hit with a crisis, an accident, that also can push you. And I think all these times in which you feel that, what's it all about, what's life all about, crisis that happens, so that includes the COVID-19, are all opportunities, really, to look clearly into your life, get not just yourself, but get someone not just one person, but a few other people who can reflect, those who care about you, those whom you know will be people who can guide you. So it can be, yes, it can be a counselor, yes, it can be a very good friend, it can be a very good relative, or even a parent, and of course you can have a spiritual director, a spiritual counselor.
I guess for our listeners, it would particularly refer to the spouse as well. Remember, we said the wife is always right.
Right. And the other thing is also the humility to listen to feedback. That is so crucial. And sometimes, this is something which I've seen also, sometimes people who get angry with you, people who don't care about you and throw back the truth at you. There's also something to be learned there, really. And if it's too painful, if it's too difficult, well, you speak to your spouse, speak to somebody that you can, well, this incident happened. What is my contribution to what occurred? What is my contribution to the problem? And you could learn quite a number of things. Take your time to gather all these feedback from different people. I think counselors who are able to look back in your history, especially those who are psychodynamically trained, they will be able to give you a little bit more insight into your developmental experiences that makes you the way you are. And that can be very helpful, because to be aware of your tendencies, to be aware of your attachment styles, for example, which we spoke about in the earlier episodes, these can all be helpful in guiding you to make decisions onto what is the next career, what is the next step that I can do for the remainder of my life.
Right. As for those who are really seriously contemplating a change of career or change of vocation, or for younger people who are choosing their vocation in life, what are some of the factors? Let's say if somebody were to come to you and say, Bryan, I'm thinking of a career choice right now, what are the factors you would ask the person to consider in influencing the choice of vocation that he or she would choose?
Well, the first thing I will do is I'll give the person a personality profile questionnaire, and based on that profile, I will give a debrief. This results of the questionnaire that you've done tells me that you are very independent, or you're very dependent. You like to be sociable, or you don't like to be sociable. So you can have this whole range of parameters. And based on that, then we can have a few options. I'll give you an example. I have this girl who, she was in religious training. She was supposed to be training towards one of the Catholic orders, yeah. And the person who was training her was complaining that she was so quiet. She tends to withdraw. She's not very engaging. But in academics, she does fine. She's fine. Giving her work to do, she can do it and everything. And so they were not very clear about whether they should allow her, because they said, as a religious, you're supposed to be able to engage with people and all of that. So we did this personality profiling.
Charism of a particular order.
Yes, right. And what we found was that this particular girl didn't like confrontations. It was because of her background. And on the other hand, she always looks towards a kind of a peacemaking solution. How do we resolve issues? And that was what we found was something that really caught her attention all the time. And that's because in her family there were so many disputes, there were so many quarrels, even though they were not violent, but emotionally it was very upsetting to her. And that also explains her quiet demeanor, but it does not mean that she was not listening. She was actually listening very, very intently. And one of the things that we spoke, myself and this girl, what are the kind of work that you'll be happy with, what you would like to do? And she says, no, I don't want to be the person who is doing all this, on the stage and performing and all that. So when I said to her, what about the role of a peacemaker? And she says, is there such a job? I said, yes, they are professional mediators. And there's a course. It's not available in Singapore, but there are courses in Europe where they do train people to be professional mediators. And I think the Catholic Church also plays a very important role. So, for example, America and Cuba, where they re-established ties, the Vatican was very, very much involved in this work of mediation. So it is very much an important work. And her eyes lit up and she says, that sounds like the kind of work that I really, really would be interested in. So I told that to the formator. And I asked the formator, would such a role be something that your congregation would be interested in? And they said, yes, we would be very interested, but we just never thought that, we have someone who is interested in this. I said, well, okay, now you have someone. And from what I was told, a few years later, she's doing very well.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank God.
This gives you an idea of when you know the person's background and what drives the person, sometimes you can actually find something that really fits them very well. So this is just one example.
That's really wonderful. But sometimes, perhaps even the situations in the office can perhaps be God's way of directing us to another direction in life. I'm reminded of my wife's past in the office when all these things actually came about, and there are such unrealistic and high expectations put on her, and to the point whereby she was unable to give adequate time to the children at home. And after a lot of consideration, she finally decided that was it. She was going to give up that job. It was not easy, having been in the workforce for so many years, but she decided that the children were more important, so she decided to call it quits and come up. But it was not easy. It took a long time to get over it, because the change from being a working mother to a stay-at-home mother was huge. There were so many differences in the lifestyle that we had, so to speak, right? And even the children were quite curious as to why they couldn't buy as many things as they used to. But what they did appreciate was that they had more time with mummy, right? And that was, in a sense, that compensated more than anything else. And they were so happy that the mummy could be at home with them. And I myself could see them grow and flourish so beautifully. After my wife made that decision to stay at home and be with them, it was difficult initially. It was very difficult. Psychologically, emotionally, it was tough. And she really needed to go through a lot of soul-searching, reflection and prayer to really be convinced that this was the path that God wanted her to be in. So today, being happy grandparents, she now has never, she now absolutely does not regret the decision she made that many years ago.
Yes, in line with the topic that we're talking today, and that is, how can we help society move in the correct direction? Now, I know that there are some office environments, some cultures in the work place where they have this kind of a unspoken mantra: your private life, your family life is your private stuff. I don't want to know about it. You have a task, I give you the task, you give it to me or not. I don't think that is good. I think it's very important that companies, organizations, we must also have a certain amount of understanding of our workers. But how do we do that without crossing into something that is private and confidential? So when someone tells you something private and confidential, what do you do with it? I think this is where, let's begin with the family. if a child tells something private and confidential to the parent, and if the parent does not keep that private and confidential, the child will never tell the parent something private and confidential again.
You bet. You bet. Absolutely.
Right. So it begins with when someone tells you something private and confidential, you keep that private and confidential. And if you think someone else needs to know, you ask permission. If the person doesn't give you permission, don't say anything. That is so crucial in developing trust. That's number one. Secondly, in developing the awareness of what's going on behind that person. Because that kind of awareness literally fine-tunes your manpower management. Fine-tunes your manpower policies over time. Until you have that openness and that avenue in which you will, people in working for you trust you to tell you what are they struggling with, then you can shape your manpower policies properly and appropriately. I know of companies in which the turnover of manpower is just so high because they don't want to have this kind of awareness. And when you have a very high turnover, you never build up the expertise over time.
So it would seem that such change in policies will not just benefit the employees themselves, who will have this, in a sense, the burden of unrealistic expectations removed from them, but it would actually, through a proper analysis and understanding of the employees' backgrounds and situations and gifts and talents, they would be able to tap them in an appropriate way, and in so doing, and without putting extra unrealistic expectations and pressures on them, the company actually benefits from even better performances from the employees themselves.
Yes. I'm very, very, very confident that when you do what is right, your company, your job will be sustainable for the long-term good of everybody else.
Right. I can never disagree with that. In fact, what you've just said would remind me of what St. John Paul II said, that the human person must be at the center of every ethical analysis, by which he really meant that in every decision we make, we must make the person at the center of that decision, that it must benefit that person in a holistic way and not use that person as an instrument or a digit to serve other purposes like profits. Oh, right. And I think it really helps us to, in a way, round off this session very well by helping us really understand better. For example, for those who are listening in as parents, what are the decisions that we would like to make in order to have a good work-life balance for ourselves? They have. So I think it has been a very good way of, in a way, rounding up this whole thing, Brian. Yeah, and this episode has been very useful.
Thank you, John, for giving me this opportunity to share on this topic.
Thank you very much, Brian. So we'll be going on to the next topic next week. Take care then. Till then, God bless. Bye-bye.